Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. I'm Joseph Lobosco with host Adrienne Barker, joined tonight by our amazing guest host, Debbie Dowling Wahba. We're delving into the perplexing case of Ellen Greenberg, a 27-year-old teacher found dead inside her allegedly locked apartment 603 in Philadelphia.
Before we continue, a disclaimer. Tonight's episode includes discussions of graphic violence and suicide, which some listeners may find upsetting. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling, help may be available via the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Joseph, Debbie, and myself, we are not attorneys, law enforcement officials, or we're not medical professionals. We do research each case thoroughly, but this show is recorded live with minimal editing. Any factual errors are unintentional. Any individuals, businesses, or organizations mentioned who haven't been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Joseph, Debbie, or Debate the News. And as always, we approach this story with respect for the victim, Ellen Greenberg. May she rest in peace.
This disturbing case has ignited controversy for over a decade, raising questions about whether we're looking at a cleverly staged murder or an almost inconceivable act of self-harm. We'll explore what makes Ellen's death in apartment 603 so contentious and why it continues to haunt investigators, forensic experts, and the public.
Hi, I'm Debbie Dowling Wahba, joining Joseph and Adrienne as a guest host tonight. The story of Ellen Greenberg's death is both heartbreaking and confounding, a young life cut short under circumstances that defy easy explanation. A vibrant first grade teacher with a loving family and fiancé found dead in her own kitchen with a knife in her chest and dozens of wounds. We'll walk through the full timeline from Ellen's background and the tragic night in apartment 603 to the botched investigation, dueling forensic opinions, and the ongoing fight to uncover the truth. This is Debate the News, True Crime. Let's dive into the case timeline.
Ellen Greenberg was a 27-year-old first grade teacher in Philadelphia, engaged to her fiancé, Sam Goldberg. By early 2011, she lived with Sam in a Manayunk apartment and was known as kind and a fun-loving person. Though Ellen had recently been dealing with anxiety, for which she sought treatment, her loved ones insist she was not suicidal.
On January 26, 2011, a snowstorm hit Philadelphia, and Ellen left work early to return home. Around 4:45 p.m. that day, Sam Goldberg, her fiancé, went to their apartment building's gym. When he returned roughly 40 minutes later, he found the apartment's door secured from the inside with a swing bar latch. Sam knocked and called Ellen repeatedly with no answer. After about 40 to 45 minutes of trying to reach her, he forced the door open. Around 6:30 p.m. and called 911 upon finding Ellen on the kitchen floor, unresponsive and covered in blood. While on the phone with the dispatcher, Sam began CPR and only then noticed a knife sticking out of Ellen's chest. He told the operator that she stabbed herself or fell on a knife, though he said he wasn't sure what had happened. Emergency responders arrived to a perplexing and gruesome scene. Ellen had sustained numerous stab wounds and was beyond help, and she was pronounced dead at the scene that evening.
In the immediate aftermath, responding police oddly treated Ellen's death as an apparent suicide, despite the violent scene, and did not initially summon homicide crime scene investigators. The following morning, January 27, 2011, Assistant Medical Examiner Dr. Marlon Osborne conducted Ellen's autopsy. He documented a total of 20 stab wounds, including roughly 10 deep wounds to the back of her neck and head, as well as a 6-inch gash on her scalp. He also noted over a dozen bruises on Ellen's arms, legs, and body in various stages of healing, suggesting some were older injuries. Due to the number and location of the wounds, Dr. Osborne initially ruled the manner of death homicide, writing in his report that Ellen had been stabbed by another person.
However, this homicide finding was short lived. Police investigators had pointed out that the apartment showed no sign of forced entry or an obvious struggle, and the door had been latched from the inside. So, after a closed door meeting on April 4th, 2011, between the medical examiner's office and Philadelphia police, Dr. Osborne reversed his ruling and changed Ellen's matter of death to suicide. This abrupt about face, characterized by officials themselves as unprecedented, immediately shut down any further criminal investigation. By the time police returned with a search warrant 2 days after the death, the scene had already been professionally cleaned, erasing potential evidence, and a relative of Sam's had been allowed to remove some of Ellen's personal belongings, including her phone and laptop, from the apartment. From that point, with the case officially deemed a suicide, no suspect was pursued, and the death investigation was closed. And Sam Goldberg, who had discovered Ellen, was never considered a suspect, never charged with any wrongdoing. And the Greenbergs later said this outcome crushing, as it meant authorities would not seek a potential killer.
Ellen's parents, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, refused to accept the suicide ruling from the start. They knew their daughter and found it inconceivable she would take her own life in such a violent manner. In the years following 2011, the Greenbergs launched their own quest for answers, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on independent experts and private investigators. They hired renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wench, who reviewed the autopsy evidence and concluded that Ellen's stab wounds did not appear to be self-inflicted. They also brought in forensic neuropathologist Dr. Wayne Ross to examine the case. Dr. Ross found evidence consistent with strangulation, suggesting Ellen may have been choked prior to the stabbing, and believed that the death scene may have been staged to look like a suicide.
As part of their independent investigation, the Greenbergs team highlighted several forensic anomalies that had been glossed over. First, Ellen had no defensive wounds on her hands or arms despite suffering a frenzied attack, a detail that police interpreted as evidence she harmed herself, though others argue it could mean she was incapacitated early in the attack. Indeed, one of the stab wounds discovered during the autopsy penetrated the base of Ellen's skull and severed the cranial nerves or spinal cord. Experts asserted that this particular wound would have incapacitated Ellen almost immediately, making it nearly impossible for her to continue stabbing herself afterward.
Yet Ellen had many more wounds, raising the question of how could this occur if she had delivered a fatal blow to herself early on? And additionally, a former Philadelphia prosecutor, Guy DeAndrea, who reviewed the case from 2015 to 2017, he agreed that the circumstances defied a suicide finding. And he pointed out that the swing bar door latch could have been easily fastened by someone exiting the apartment. And what that means is an intruder could have staged that locked room scenario, and that at least two stab wounds were likely inflicted post mortem after Ellen was already passed. And these findings suggested that someone else was involved and attempted to make the scene appear self inflicted.
The autopsy's discovery of numerous old and new bruises on Ellen's body also troubled the family. They wondered if those injuries indicated prior domestic violence or altercations in the days and weeks before her death. Ellen's behavior in the period leading up to the incident had changed. She was abnormally anxious and edgy, and she had recently begun taking medication for anxiety on a psychiatrist's advice. Notably, the psychiatrist later stated Ellen did not seem suicidal during their sessions. The family believed this context, combined with the wound analysis, pointed strongly to a homicide. Over the years, the Greenbergs kept Ellen's case in the public eye, gathering over 100,000 petition signatures, urging authorities to reopen the investigation. At every turn, they pushed to have the manner of death changed from suicide to either homicide or at the very least undetermined, in hopes of spurring a fresh criminal investigation.
Frustrated by official inaction, Ellen's parents turned to the courts. They filed a civil lawsuit in 2019 against the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office and Dr. Osborne, seeking to overturn the manner of death on Ellen's death certificate. Essentially, they asked the court to compel a change of the ruling from suicide to homicide or undetermined, which would force the case to be reopened for investigation. In 2022, the Greenbergs filed a second lawsuit, this time against the city of Philadelphia, the former chief medical examiner, Dr. Sam Galino, and several police and city officials, accusing them of mishandling the case and orchestrating a cover up of a murder. The 2022 complaint laid out many of the investigative failures, such as the premature crime scene cleanup and the unprecedented meeting that led to the suicide ruling, and alleged a conspiracy to intentionally botch the investigation.
These legal efforts slowly began to yield results. In early 2023, facing mounting pressure, jurisdiction over the case bounced between agencies due to conflicts of interest. Philadelphia's district attorney had recused himself because he had once been consulted by the Greenbergs. The case then went to the Pennsylvania Attorney General and then was passed to the neighboring Chester County District Attorney's Office. And despite these handoffs, no charges were filed and no change was made to the death classification at that time.
The real breakthrough came in January of 2025. After years of litigation, the city of Philadelphia agreed to a settlement with the Greenbergs. On February 3rd, 2025, the city settled both the 2019 and 2022 lawsuits, including a modest monetary payment to the family and, reportedly, an agreement by the medical examiner's office to reopen the investigation into Ellen's death. As part of the settlement, Dr. Marlon Osborne, the very pathologist who had changed the ruling to suicide in 2011, signed a sworn affidavit on January 31st, 2025, formally reversing his original conclusion. In the statement, Dr. Osborne said it was now his professional opinion that Ellen's manner of death could be classified as something other than suicide. He explained that after reviewing new evidence and consulting with a neuropathologist, he no longer believed Ellen died by her own hand. For Ellen's parents, this moment was a validation of their decades-long fight. With the settlement in place, Philadelphia's chief medical examiner, Dr. Lindsay Simon, undertook a comprehensive re-examination of the case in 2025, including new forensic analysis and a review of all prior evidence to determine if the manner of death should be changed to homicide or undetermined.
After several months of reinvestigation, the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office released its findings in a detailed 32-page report in October 2025. To the Greenbergs' family disappointment, Dr. Lindsay Simon reaffirmed Ellen's manner of death as suicide. The review did acknowledge the unusual nature of Ellen's wounds, but ultimately concluded that the evidence was more consistent with a self-inflicted death. Dr. Simon's team cataloged 23 stab and incised wounds, slightly more than initially reported, on Ellen's chest, neck, and head, and identified 31 distinct bruises on her body. Many of the smaller knife wounds were characterized as possible hesitation wounds, which are shallow cuts or jabs sometimes seen in self-harm cases. Crucially, the report noted the absence of any defensive wounds and stated that the fact remains that Ellen would be capable of inflicting these injuries on herself. Investigators found no evidence of an assailant. There were no signs of an intruder in the apartment, and forensic testing did not detect any of Sam Goldberg's DNA on the knife or on Ellen's body. The report also cited Ellen's history of anxiety, suggesting her mental state may have played a role. Dr. Simon concluded that, while the number and distribution of wounds was highly atypical, the scenario of suicide was still the best classification for the case.
This reaffirmation of suicide effectively closed the case once again. In an October 2025 court hearing following the report's release, attorneys for both the Greenbergs and the city indicated that Based on the medical examiner's review, they now consider the matter resolved and the civil case was closed. For Ellen's parents, the result was devastating. Their attorney lambasted the 2025 review as deeply flawed, accusing it of cherry picking evidence and focusing on Ellen's mental health struggles while ignoring critical forensic contradictions. He called the report a deeply flawed attempt to justify a predetermined conclusion, arguing that key questions like how Ellen could stab herself after a spinal cord injury or who cleaned the crime scene, it still remained unanswered. And the Greenberg family voiced outrage that, in their view, Philadelphia authorities once again turned their back on the truth. And Sandy and Josh Greenberg, they left the courthouse with no change to Ellen's death certificate. But they did not concede defeat. And the father's attorney said, though Ellen City turns its back on her, we will continue through other avenues to get justice for her murder by any means necessary.
As of late 2025, we're here recording this in late November of 2025. Ellen Greenberg's official cause of death remains suicide, a finding her family fiercely disputes. The case that began on a snowy day in 2011 has become one of Philadelphia's most controversial mysteries. Despite the latest legal setback, Ellen's parents continue to fight for a true accounting of what happened to their daughter, holding out hope that someday the lingering questions will be answered and her case will be reopened once more.
So, Joseph and Debbie, what do you think really happened to Ellen Greenberg in that apartment that night?
I believe she was murdered. The amount of stab wounds to me said that it was also personal, because we've seen that in many other cases where somebody is stabbed multiple times, it's personal. And I just cannot buy that it is a suicide because of the injuries to the back of her neck and how she was stabbed in the cervical spine. And I did read one of the medical reports that we had, and it actually says that the multiple stab wounds to the back and upper neck and lower head found in an autopsy were unlikely suicidal stab wounds, especially the different directions. The fact remains that to the back of her neck and for the amount of stab wounds that she had, I just cannot buy that it was a suicide.
Honestly, I am not sure. I think it's possible that she was murdered, but at the same time, I'm like, maybe it really was a suicide or some type of unfortunate accident. I'm really in the middle on this still. I really don't know for sure.
I don't think she killed herself. I have to agree with Debbie. The injuries that she had in her back and in her the back of her head, there's no way that she could have done that to herself. There's no way. I think it was all a stage and somebody else did this, not her.
Well, I'm reading the Dr. Marlon Osborne, the pathologist who performed the autopsy. He said in a court filing, since issuing the amended death certificate, and here it is, I have become aware of additional information, and it is my professional opinion Ellen's manner of death should be designated as something other than suicide, as was said. But what is that additional information?
So the additional information was him finding out that that doorman did not accompany the boyfriend up to the apartment, and therefore
Right.
no one knew whether it was actually latched or not.
What does that have to do with a pathologist performing an autopsy?
That's a great question, Maria. And that's been a big point of contention because when this medical examiner first looked at the body, he said it's a homicide. But then they had a closed door meeting a day or two later, and all of a sudden he changed it from homicide to suicide.
I watch enough Law and Order. It's a lot. I know I watch a lot of it where the person doing the autopsy is only looking at the body and not sitting in an office talking about details of the crime scene. So I believe that his original classification of death as a homicide is accurate unless something that he saw on the body showed that it was a suicide. Your job is to look at the body, look at the direction of the stab wounds, compare that to the height, do the signs of that, but don't sit and talk about who opened the door or what the condition of the door was. It's like, I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me.
I agree with you, Maria. Debbie, so you think it was a murder? You think there's no possibility of a suicide?
No, I don't. I really don't. Just by the amount of the stab wounds, by the fact that she was stabbed in the back of her neck. I mean, first of all, who's gonna stab themselves that many times? That to me, just the amount of stab wounds is a crime of passion. We've seen it on many cases where if it's one stab wound, then it's not, but when it's multiple stab wounds like that, it is a crime of passion. That is not somebody trying to die by suicide. To me, it is straight out a murder.
I would agree. I think suicide, I think while it's possible, it just seems ridiculous based on everything we know. I mean, she had a huge gash on the back of her head. To me, the suicide theory is a little bit crazy. But for me, my issue is the motive because the fiance didn't have a criminal past. She had never mentioned that they'd even been in a verbal fight. So the motive is weird to me. Why would this guy who is seemingly in a very happy, loving, healthy relationship, why would he just all of a sudden snap and stab her 20 times? Like, that's what's difficult for me.
Anybody look into his past relationships and how or why they ended?
No, they didn't, because he was never a suspect, so nobody looked into anything because they all this whole thing about the suicide, but here's the thing, nobody ever knows what really goes on behind closed doors, and look at they said all these bruises, so who knows, she may have been being abused, we don't know all that, but it seems that she had a lot of injuries even prior to that with those bruising that was on her body, so, w nobody knows what went on, like I said, behind those closed doors. Being that Sam, her fiancé, was never considered a suspect, they didn't think to even go and look into what he was up to and what he was doing and what there may be a motive for, because they've always tried to say that it was a suicide after that strange and suspicious closed door meeting.
So it does look like Sam's uncle, who is an attorney, did take possession of Ellen's school laptop after her death, but he did not hand it immediately over to police. It eventually made its way over to the police, but only after school district lawyers became involved. And this was not done under any police authorization. But I think that's interesting too. What a big red flag. I mean, he's an attorney. Wouldn't he know not to remove evidence from a death scene? Hmm. And they found, texting that seemed that Sam was aggravated, right? Like how he was texting her seemed like he was upset. So, and that's interesting. Did he do that to plan it or like who knows? But what was not collected that day was Ellen's school laptop because Sam's uncle took it before the police realized that it existed. So, mhm.
He did send texts that showed that he was aggravated, but at the same time, if I was locked out of my apartment for over an hour and the doorman wouldn't go and let me in, and my fiance wasn't answering, I would be pissed too. So I don't know if we can necessarily hold that against him that he was frustrated, because I think most people would be frustrated in that situation.
If he was that upset, though, that she wasn't answering, first of all, if she's typically one that answers, why didn't he become concerned and call the police to have the police enter the apartment and do like a wellness check?
That's a good point, Debbie. That's a very good point because breaking down a door, that's kind of like a last resort, right? Okay, so I think it's possible, and this is all alleged, because again, technically, this is a suicide. Technically, Sam has not been charged with anything, so this is just hypothetical, theoretical. I think it's possible that maybe he went into the apartment, they got into some type of a fight, a struggle happened, and she fell on the knife or something happened accidentally where she was using the knife. They got into some type of an altercation. She has bruises that from the autopsy photos to me could look like someone was almost holding her hand, like there was some type of a struggle. She got stabbed, and then you have a situation where he's like, "Holy shit." He somehow exits the apartment, is able to latch that door as he's like leaving, or he didn't even latch it to begin with, and that was a lie. Goes down to the gym, sets up his alibi, and then comes back and pretends like he just found her like that. I think there's maybe a situation where it was an accidental death.
But she was found with the knife in her heart, which means that that was probably one of the last stab wounds. So there's a lot of other stab wounds in that. Not that your theory couldn't be wrong or right. What caused it, I don't know, but I still think that it was a murder.
So taking your theory, Joseph, if it was an accident, why would he then stab her 19 more times? Why wouldn't he call 911 and try and help her?
That's a good point. Is it possible that someone else killed her? Is it possible that he went to the gym and in that time period, the door was left open, someone went in there, attacked her, killed her, locked the door behind them, and left?
I would buy that theory over the fact that it was a suicide.
It's possible. There's a lot of what ifs.
I do think it's weird, though, that they said that in the months leading up to this, she did seem to be having some mental health issues that she hadn't had previously. Her aunt and her friends were saying that she always had this spark and this glow about her, and that really wasn't the case. Like something was wrong, something changed with her, where she just was like acting like a completely different person. And then she went to see the psychiatrist. So while I think the suicide theory is outlandish and it really doesn't make sense, she definitely was having some psychiatric and personality change issues leading up to that.
But they say a lot in most cases, if you notice, when people have a change like that, that seem to be so kind of quick, that there's some kind of abuse or something introduced into their life that wasn't going on before. And that's why I feel like you don't know what was going behind those closed doors and how they were behind closed doors. That is not something like that just comes on that quickly like that if there's not something that kind of triggers it. So something triggered it that she was having this anxiety and having to seek that medical attention. And that I can tell you from my own personal experience.
So I agree with Debbie that something must have happened. And that matches the autopsy report with the fading bruises that were not from that fateful day in January.
And they didn't find anything in her system other than, I believe, Klonopin, which she was prescribed. I think initially she was on Xanax, and I don't think she did well with that. So they switched her to Klonopin, I think Ambien, and she seemed to be doing better on that.
Joseph, it's Mama Kate. Hello. So I'm wondering if she is a victim of domestic violence, because when you are a victim, your nerves are shot, you're scared, can't sleep, right? Which could potentially, you know, explain the usage of such medications listed previously. And I honestly think that the fiance is the perpetrator because my mom, as wise as she is, used to say, the one who speaks the most in an argument is usually wrong or lying. And for him to call and call and call and call just to leave a track record, for the police to find out, I'm so concerned, you know, but really he's not. He just wanted to try to cover his trap. And I agree with everyone else that are saying that you cannot logically stab yourself in your spinal cord and stab yourself in the heart.
I mean, she said that there was no issues going on, but again, we don't know. If someone's being abused, we know that sometimes people will cover up for their abusers. So yes, it's possible that there was some type of situation like that going on that would explain her mental health symptoms coming on, like Debbie said.
It seemed like the psychiatrist wanted to help. So I think that while we may not be privy to all of it, the psychiatrist thought that there was no way she would do this to herself. I mean, I don't know how you go to a therapist and not tell them what's causing your anxiety or your episodes. I mean, you have to justify what happened and why you're feeling that way before they're going to start prescribing drugs to you, especially narcotics.
I'm going to disagree with you on that. because she's
I want to say that this was a good psychiatrist. How about that, Debbie?
Well, no, because, a lot of times if you're experiencing anxiety and you're having those panic attacks, the initial appointment and maybe even the second one is more of just getting you to be in a calm space where you could actually have those conversations. They're initially trying to just get you to a spot where you can open up and say what is causing them. But when you first go to those doctors, when you're having this anxiety and you're having the panic attacks, you don't want to talk about anything else other than what is going to stop this feeling for me. So they're going to get you out of that feeling, and then they're going to talk to you more and try to dig deeper into what it is that is bringing that on. But when you're in that state, you don't want to talk about it. You just want the relief from having all those symptoms.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think that the timeline was off too, because I think that she switched the medications 3 appointments before she passed. I think she had been seeing the psychiatrist longer, and it's just not documented in the things that I was sent.
But as for the knife, okay. So you guys are saying that it's not possible. And granted, I am not a medical examiner, I have no clue. But she had a 10-inch knife sticking out of her chest. You don't think with a 10-inch long knife you could stab yourself with those stabs on her neck?
Wait, didn't he say he didn't even notice it until what was that? I think I heard you say that.
That was weird. The 911 call, we can't play it because we don't have the rights to it, but it was very strange. He claims he only noticed the knife sticking out when the 911 operator instructed him to give her CPR. I find that hard to believe.
So
Yeah.
what in one of the papers that you sent me, Joseph, it said that the way she was slumped over against the cabinet on the floor, sort of half slumped over, half leaning against the cupboard, is why he didn't see it.
I mean, if he truly did not do this to her and he really was just coming back from the gym, he's been outside for an hour, can't get in. He breaks in, he opens the door, he sees her, he sees the blood, he sees her slumped over. It could be that he really is in such a state of shock and confusion that he doesn't notice it. And maybe because she was slumped over, but I don't know. That sounds difficult to believe.
All right, these are the lessons we can learn from Ellen Greenberg case. First one, a clean crime scene doesn't always mean a clear story, and a lack of struggle doesn't equal a lack of foul play. And without Ellen's parents pushing, appealing, refusing to go away, this case would have been buried under the paperwork years ago. Investigations fail when systems protect themselves instead of the victim. Every death deserves the full truth, not the fastest label. Suicide cannot be a shortcut. It must be a conclusion backed by evidence. And finally, silence helps no one. Talking about cases like we are here on Debate the News True Crime, it keeps pressure on the system, awareness on the evidence, and dignity on the victim who cannot speak for herself. Thank you for letting me share these lessons.
Amazing lessons, Adrienne. I love that.
That concludes tonight's episode of Debate the News True Crime. The case of Ellen Greenberg is as haunting as it is frustrating. And the violent and mystifying death of a young woman, a beautiful young woman, officially solved on paper, yet unresolved in the minds of so many. What happened in apartment 603 on that snowy January day remains shrouded in uncertainty. And if Ellen did take her own life, it was a manner almost unheard of, leaving her loved ones tormented by questions.
And if she was killed, her murderer has never been brought to justice. It's a case that challenges our faith in forensic science and in the institutions meant to deliver justice. Ellen's parents have shown extraordinary tenacity in seeking answers, and their fight is a reminder that sometimes families have to become their own investigators to keep a case alive.
Ellen Greenberg's story leaves us with a chilling thought. Sometimes a death can fall into a gray area between homicide and suicide, and the truth can nearly slip through the cracks. This case has prompted changes. For instance, it sparked discussions in Pennsylvania about how coroners and medical examiners handle equivocal deaths. and it's brought to light why thorough crime scene processing is absolutely critical, even when things appear obvious.
Above all, we must not forget the human side of this. Ellen was an only child, a beloved fiancé, a dedicated teacher who had her whole life ahead of her. And her death, whatever the cause, it only compounded the heartbreak for those who knew and loved her. And we can only hope that one day all the lingering questions will be answered and Ellen's family can truly find closure.
Thank you to everyone for tuning in and delving into this complex case with us. We appreciate you being a part of our Debate the News true crime community. If you found tonight's episode informative and thought provoking, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Your support helps us to continue these in depth discussions and reach others who care about uncovering the truth behind the headlines.
Stay safe, stay vigilant, and have a happy Thanksgiving. To our listeners, this episode is going to drop on Tuesday. We are taking the week of Thanksgiving off, so we will be back with a new episode on Thursday, December 4th, and we will resume recording our live episodes on Tuesday, December 2nd. Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for supporting us on Debate the News True Crime. Adrienne and I started this in April of this year. We started recording, and then we launched the podcast in late August, and we are just so appreciative of all the people who tune in and write in. And we've had listeners come in and meet us on Chatter Social, and we talked about the podcast, and we just really are so grateful for all the support. We spend a lot of time and effort and energy on this podcast, and it's really important to us. So we just want to thank you from both Adrienne and myself for supporting us. Good night.